The first thing she tasted was smoke. The Montana sky was on fire, and Oakley Kincaid was trapped inside a burning barn, the screams tearing from her own throat. Flames clawed up the walls, hungry yellow tongues licking the very beams that held her prisoner. Randall Tucker had done this, a man who'd lost this ranch to her father in a poker game and had sworn to take it back, piece by agonizing piece. Smoke flooded her lungs. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her heart. She wasn't just trapped, she was being cooked alive. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had only minutes to live. This is how a life ends, she thought. Not with a bang, but with a fire. Then, through the roar, she heard another sound. Hoofbeats, fast and desperate. A rider, a silhouette against the inferno, was charging directly toward the flames. Not away from them. But who in God's name rides into a fire? Xavier Youngblood had been riding for 2 days straight, his bones aching with a weariness that went deeper than muscle. He was a ghost, leaving his old life in Texas to burn behind him, seeking something new in the untamed wilds of Montana. He hadn't been looking for trouble, but when he saw that orange boil on the horizon, trouble had clearly found him. He spurred his horse, the exhausted animal finding a last reserve of strength. As he got closer, the smell of burning pine and something else, something awful, filled the air. He heard the screams. Desperate. Female. He dismounted before his horse even stopped, his boots hitting the scorched earth. He circled the barn, a furnace roaring against the twilight. Every door was bolted, from the outside. This wasn't an accident. This was a murder in progress. He slammed his shoulder against the main door. The thick wood groaned but held fast. He wasn't getting in that way. He kept running, his eyes stinging from the smoke, searching for any weakness, any way in. He heard a frantic scratching sound from the far side. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" he yelled, his voice rough against the crackle of the fire. A choked voice came from inside. "Here! I'm here!" Xavier saw it then, a small gap near the ground where the planks had been clawed at from the inside. Through the splintered wood, he saw a face. Covered in soot, eyes wide with a terrifying mix of fear and sheer, stubborn will. "The doors are locked," she coughed, the words ragged. "I made this hole. I need help." Xavier didn't waste a second. He pulled his hunting knife, the steel gleaming in the firelight, and began hacking at the wood. The heat was a physical blow, blistering his skin. Smoke poured from the gap, a toxic cloud that made him want to retch. But he kept working, his muscles screaming in protest, tearing away chunks of wood. He knew every second was borrowed time. "Push!" he yelled, wrenching another plank free. The opening was bigger now, but still dangerously small. "Push now!" Oakley threw every last ounce of her strength into it. She forced her body through the jagged hole, the rough wood tearing at her skin, at her clothes. Pain was a distant thought. The only thing that mattered was the cool night air on the other side. With one final desperate shove, she tumbled out onto the ground, gasping, her lungs burning. Xavier grabbed her, dragging her away from the collapsing structure just as a massive support beam gave way, sending a volcano of sparks into the dark sky. They lay there on the dirt, two strangers, united by fire and desperation, just trying to breathe. When Oakley could finally speak, she looked up at the man who'd pulled her from her own funeral pyre. He was lean, weathered, with eyes the color of a dawn sky. "You saved my life," she whispered. He just nodded, helping her to her feet. "Who locked you in there?" "Randall Tucker," she spat, the name tasting like ash and hatred. "He wants our land." Xavier's gaze swept the darkened ranch. "Where's your family?" "Billings, for supplies. They won't be back for 2 more days. As she said it, a wave of shock hit her. Her legs gave out. Xavier caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "You need water. Rest," he said, his voice firm, a steady anchor in the chaos. "Is the house safe?" She nodded weakly, pointing to a small cabin 100 yards away. As he carried her toward it, she stirred. "I don't even know your name." "Xavier Youngblood," he said, setting her gently on a porch chair. "Oakley Kincaid," she replied, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Youngblood." He took her offered hand, feeling the calluses of a woman who worked for a living. "Call me Xavier." He helped her inside, fetched her a cup of cool water from the well. He watched as she drank, saw the fight returning to her eyes. This was no damsel in distress. This was a survivor. "Tucker will be back," she said, her voice stronger now. "He won't stop until he has this ranch." "Why does he want it so badly?" Xavier asked, taking a seat across from her. "My father won it from him. A poker game," she explained, anger hardening her features. "Tucker claims Pa cheated. He's been threatening us ever since. But this is the first time he's tried to kill one of us." Xavier's jaw tightened. He knew men like Tucker. Bullies who hid their weakness behind violence. "Your father and brother are gone for 2 days?" "Yes, until day after tomorrow." Xavier stood up, his mind made. It was a decision that would change the course of his entire life, though he didn't know it yet. "Then I'll stay until they return." Oakley looked at him, stunned. "You don't have to do that. You've already done more than enough." His dawn-colored eyes met hers, and there was no room for argument in them. "Miss Kincaid, that man tried to murder you. I'm not leaving you here alone to face him when he comes back." She studied him for a long moment, this stranger who had walked out of the night and into her nightmare. A man who ran toward fires. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you," she said. And in that moment, an unspoken pact was sealed between them, a pact of survival. But as Xavier stood watch on the porch that night, rifle in hand, he couldn't shake a strange feeling. He hadn't just stumbled upon this ranch. Something had guided him here. He looked out at the smoldering ruins of the barn, then back at the woman inside the cabin. He had come to Montana to escape his past. He was beginning to think his past had followed him here. The next day dawned quiet. Too quiet. The air was thick with tension, the blackened skeleton of the barn a constant grim reminder of what Tucker was capable of. Xavier and Oakley worked together, salvaging what they could, moving with an easy rhythm as if they'd known each other for years, not hours. "He'll come back today," Oakley said, breaking the silence. "He'll want to see his handiwork, to see if I'm dead." "We'll be ready," Xavier said, his hand resting near the Colt peacemaker at his hip. They spent the afternoon turning the cabin into a small fortress. They checked weapons, boarded up a back window, and planned. Xavier was impressed. Oakley was calm, practical, her mind as sharp and dangerous as a skinning knife. There was no fear in her, only a cold, hard resolve. As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, they heard it. The sound of horses. 3 riders moving slow and deliberate, approaching the house. "Tucker," Oakley breathed, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "And the Parson brothers. Hired guns." Xavier stepped in front of her. "Stay back from the windows. Let me handle this." Oakley gave a humorless snort. "This is my home, Mr. Youngblood." "And they tried to make it your grave," he countered, his voice low and firm. "Let me talk first. If it comes to a fight, we fight together." She hesitated, then nodded. The riders stopped 20 yards out. A tall man with a thick, greasy mustache dismounted. It was Tucker. He smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "Oakley Kincaid," he called out. "I see you survived the bonfire. Pity. Come on out. Let's talk business." Xavier stepped onto the porch alone, his rifle held loosely at his side. "Miss Kincaid isn't doing business with you, Tucker." Tucker's eyes narrowed, taking in the stranger. "And who the hell are you? Her new stable boy?" "I'm the man who doesn't like finding women locked in burning buildings," Xavier said, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. Tucker threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Well, boys, looks like she found herself a knight in shining armor." He turned his attention back to Xavier. "This ain't your concern, Drifter. It's between me and the Kincaids." "You made it my concern when you struck that match," Xavier replied, his finger brushing the trigger. Tucker's smile vanished. "That land is mine. Her old man cheated me. He won it fair and square." Oakley's voice rang out as she stepped onto the porch, unable to stay hidden any longer. Tucker spat on the ground. "Your pa ain't here to protect you, girl, and this one drifter ain't enough to stop me from taking what's mine." He glanced at Xavier, then back at Oakley, his eyes filled with a simmering rage. "I'll be back, Kincaid, and when I return, this whole place is going up in flames." He mounted his horse, but before he rode off, he looked straight at Xavier. "And you, Drifter, you ever hear of a man named Cyrus Blackwood?" Xavier froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. Cyrus Blackwood, the man who had ruined his family, the man who had stolen his future. A ghost from the past he had ridden 1,000 miles to escape. Tucker saw the flicker of recognition in Xavier's eyes, and his cruel smile returned. "I thought so. You tell me, Drifter, what's a man like you doing so far from Texas?" He wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving Xavier standing on the porch, his blood running cold. Oakley stared at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Xavier, what was that about? Who is Cyrus Blackwood?" Xavier's face was a mask of stone. He looked from the departing riders to the woman beside him, and a horrifying truth began to dawn on him. He hadn't stumbled into someone else's fight. He had walked right into the middle of his own. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap. The air on the porch was thick with unspoken questions. Oakley stared at Xavier, whose face had gone pale beneath its tan. He looked like a man who'd just seen a ghost. "Xavier, who is Cyrus Blackwood?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. He took a slow breath, his eyes distant. "He's an old family enemy," he said, the words clipped. "A man my father did business with. Bad business." He offered no more, turning his gaze back to the dust settling on the trail where Tucker had disappeared. The lie was thin, and they both knew it. But the truth was a venom he couldn't share. Not yet. He saw the doubt in her eyes, the flicker of a new fear that had nothing to do with Randall Tucker. She had trusted him, this stranger who pulled her from a fire. Now she was realizing he was a stranger with secrets, dangerous secrets. "What does he have to do with Tucker?" she pressed. "I don't know," Xavier lied again, "but I intend to find out." That night, the easy companionship they had shared was gone, replaced by a tense, fragile silence. They took turns on watch, but neither of them truly rested. Xavier was haunted by the past, and Oakley was haunted by the man sitting in her house. She found herself watching him, trying to piece together the puzzle he presented. He was a protector, a gentleman. But there was a darkness in him, a coiled stillness that spoke of a life far more complicated than that of a simple drifter. The next morning, just as the sun was beginning to burn off the morning mist, they heard a horse approaching at a full gallop. It was a boy, no older than 15, his face slick with sweat and panic. "Jimmy Parker," Oakley said, recognizing him from a neighboring ranch. Something's wrong. The boy, Jimmy, practically fell off his horse. Miss Oakley, it's Tucker. My pa heard him in town, talking with his men. They ain't coming back here. They're gonna ambush your pa and brother on the road from Billings, at Copper Creek Crossing. Oakley's blood ran cold. When? Tomorrow morning. Pa sent me to warn you. He said Tucker knows your pa always takes the South Fork Trail to avoid the mud this time of year. Xavier's eyes narrowed. That was a specific piece of information. Too specific. Tucker had been so sure of himself yesterday, so confident. Now he was setting an ambush? It didn't feel right. Thank your father for us, Jimmy, Oakley said, already moving toward the house, her mind racing. Get home safe. As the boy rode off, Xavier grabbed Oakley's arm. Wait. There's no time, she said, pulling away. Copper Creek is a 3-hour ride. We have to leave now if we want to beat them there. Oakley, think, Xavier said, his voice low and urgent. How would Tucker know about the South Fork Trail? You said yourself it's a family shortcut. She paused, the rifle in her hand suddenly feeling very heavy. I don't know. Maybe Pa mentioned it in town. Or maybe Jimmy's pa isn't the concerned neighbor he's pretending to be, Xavier countered. Maybe this warning isn't a warning at all. Maybe it's a diversion. The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and terrifying. The idea that their neighbors, people they'd known for years, could be in league with a man like Tucker. No, Oakley whispered, shaking her head. The Parkers are good people. People do bad things for money. Or out of fear, Xavier said grimly. Tucker mentioned Cyrus Blackwood to me for a reason. This is bigger than a poker game. They're not just trying to scare you off the land. They want you gone, and sending us on a wild goose chase to Copper Creek while they come back here to wait for your father. It's the perfect way to do it. Doubt warred with loyalty on Oakley's face. Everything in her wanted to trust her neighbors, to believe in the simple story of a vengeful gambler. But Xavier's logic was cold and inescapable. Tucker's strange confidence, the mention of a name from Xavier's past, the impossibly specific details in the warning. It was a web, and they were caught in the middle of it. So what do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. If we ride to the creek, we leave the ranch undefended. If we stay, my father and brother could be riding into a trap. Xavier looked at the fork in the road, one path leading to Copper Creek, the other to Billings. They had to make a choice, and the wrong one would get her family killed. He looked at Oakley, at the fierce, desperate hope in her eyes. He knew he couldn't let her down, but he also knew that whatever choice they made, they would be making it blind, and that Tucker, or whoever was pulling the strings, was counting on exactly that. We split up, Xavier said, the words tasting like poison. It was the last thing he wanted to do, but it was their only play. It's what they won't expect. Oakley stared at him, her heart pounding. No, we stay together. Listen to me, he insisted, his hands gripping her shoulders. If this is a diversion, they want both of us gone. If one of us stays, their plan is ruined. If the ambush is real, one of us can get there to warn your father. It's the only way we cover both possibilities. She hated it. Every instinct screamed at her to stay with this man who had become her unlikely shield. But he was right. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble against an enemy they couldn't see. I'll go to the creek, she said, her jaw set. I know the terrain better than you. I can get there faster, and I'll see a trap before it's sprung. You stay. Defend the ranch. He didn't want to agree. The thought of her riding into potential danger alone made his gut twist. But she was right. She knew this land. He was the better shot, the better choice to hold the cabin if Tucker returned. He gave a sharp nod. Be careful. Don't engage. If you see anything, fire 2 shots and ride like hell. I'll hear it." "You too," she said, her voice tight. "Don't die before I get back." They locked eyes for a moment, 100 unspoken things passing between them. Then she was gone, mounting her horse and disappearing into the trees, a lone rider racing toward a phantom threat. Xavier watched her go, a profound sense of dread settling over him. He was alone, waiting for a storm to break. He reinforced the cabin, laying out ammunition, positioning rifles at the 2 main windows. The silence of the ranch was deafening. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold a man with a gun. Hours crawled by. The sun reached its peak, then began its slow descent. Doubt started to creep in. What if he'd been wrong? What if he'd sent Oakley on a fool's errand while her father was being ambushed at that very moment? The thought was torture. Then he heard it. A single horse, approaching slowly, not the sound of an attack. He peered through a crack in the boarded window. It was a lone rider, leading a second saddled horse. As the figure drew closer, Xavier's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Tucker. It wasn't the Parson brothers. It was Horace Wilkins, the banker's son from town, the very man Oakley had said her father wanted her to marry. He was dressed in expensive town clothes that looked absurdly out of place in the dusty ranch yard. He dismounted, looking around nervously, then tied the horses to the hitching post. He looked at the burned-out barn, a flicker of something. Satisfaction. In his eyes. What in God's name was he doing here? Wilkins walked up to the porch, his boots making soft thuds on the wood. He stopped at the door. He didn't knock. He pulled a key from his pocket. A key. He slid the key into the lock of the Kincaid cabin. Xavier watched, his mind reeling, as the lock clicked open. Wilkins pushed the door inward and stepped inside, a smug smile on his face. He wasn't an unexpected visitor. He was acting like he owned the place. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The poker game, the threats, the land. This was never just about Randall Tucker's wounded pride. Tucker was a blunt instrument, a thug. The real architect of this whole affair was the man now standing in Oakley's kitchen. The fine enough man from town, the man who wanted to marry her. Or more accurately, marry her ranch. Xavier raised his rifle, the bead sight settling on the center of Wilkins's back. He could end this right now. One shot. But that wouldn't answer the questions. That wouldn't save Oakley's family. He needed to know the whole plan. He lowered the rifle, melting back into the shadows of the porch as he heard more horses approaching. This time, it was 3 riders. Tucker and the Parson brothers. They dismounted and joined Wilkins inside, their voices low and urgent. Xavier crept to the window, listening. "Is the girl gone?" Tucker asked. "The Parker boy sent her off to Copper Creek, just as planned," Wilkins replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "She and that drifter took the bait. They'll be miles away when her father gets here." "Good," Tucker grunted. "I don't like it. That drifter, he knows Blackwood. That complicates things." "Blackwood is a silent partner, Randall. Nothing more," Wilkins snapped. "His name gives us leverage, that's all. The Texas cattle contracts Blackwood can provide are worth a fortune. But first, we need this land and its water rights. When Elliot Kincaid arrives, you will explain the situation to him. His daughter is gone. His ranch is surrounded. He will sign the deed over to me, or you will burn this cabin to the ground with him and his boy inside it." Xavier felt a cold fury rise within him. This was the plan. Not an ambush, a hostile takeover, orchestrated by the man who wanted to be Oakley's husband. He had tried to have her murdered, and now he was going to force her father to sign away his life's work. He had to warn them. He had to get to Oakley. But he was trapped. 1 man against 4, with Oakley's family due to arrive at any moment. He looked toward the trail leading to Copper Creek. There was no way to get a message to her in time. He was on his own. And then he heard the faint, unmistakable sound of a wagon approaching. Elliot and Oliver Kincaid were coming home. They were driving straight into a slaughterhouse. The wagon crested the ridge. Xavier could see them now, Elliot Kincaid holding the reins, his son Oliver beside him. They were less than 5 minutes away. Inside the cabin, Tucker and his men took up positions by the windows, rifles ready. Horace Wilkins stood by the table, a deed and a pen laid out like a death sentence. Xavier's mind raced, searching for an option, any option, that didn't end in a bloodbath. He was one man. If he started shooting, he might get one, maybe two, but they would cut down Elliot and Oliver before they even knew what was happening. He couldn't win a direct fight. He had to be smarter. He had to be faster. He looked at the horses tied to the post. 4 of them, Wilkins's and Tucker's gang. Then he looked at the second horse Wilkins had brought. It was a fine-looking mare, clearly a lady's riding horse. It was saddled and ready. A gift, no doubt, for the woman whose home he was stealing. The irony was sickening. But it gave him an idea. A wild, desperate, suicidal idea. He pulled a small mirror from his saddlebag, a simple tool for signaling. He angled it, catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. He flashed it once, twice, 3 times, aiming for the spot where he'd last seen Oakley disappear. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. She was probably miles away. She probably wouldn't see it. But it was the only hope he had. Then he moved. He didn't run toward the cabin. He ran toward the horses. Keeping low, using the water trough as cover, he pulled his knife. He wasn't going to steal them. That would take too long. He was going to set them free. With swift, brutal slashes, he cut the reins on Tucker's and the Parson brothers' horses. He slapped the animals hard on their rumps. They whinnied in alarm and bolted, galloping wildly across the plain. "What the hell was that?" he heard Tucker yell from inside the cabin. But Xavier was already moving again, sprinting toward the saddled mare Wilkins had brought. As Tucker and one of the Parsons burst onto the porch, Xavier swung himself into the saddle. He dug his heels into the horse's flanks, charging not away from the ranch, but directly toward the oncoming wagon. "It's the drifter!" Tucker roared, raising his rifle. A shot cracked through the air, then another. Splinters exploded from the wagon seat next to Elliot's head. The old man reacted instantly, whipping his own rifle up. "Pa! What's happening?" Oliver yelled. "Ambush!" Elliot shouted, firing back toward the cabin. Xavier raced toward them, a man possessed. "It's a trap!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Wilkins is inside! They want you alive!" He reached the wagon, wheeling the mare around. "Turn around! Get out of here!" But it was too late. The Parson brothers were fanning out from the cabin, cutting off their escape route. They were pinned down, caught in a deadly crossfire. Bullets whizzed past them, thudding into the side of the wagon. And then, just when it seemed hopeless, a miracle happened. From the ridge to the west, a single rifle shot rang out, clean and true. One of the Parson brothers cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. Xavier looked up. There, silhouetted against the setting sun, was a lone rider. Oakley. She had seen his signal. She had turned back, and she had arrived at the exact moment they needed her most. She fired again, the second shot kicking up dirt at Tucker's feet, forcing him back toward the cover of the porch. The tide had turned, but the fight was far from over. Wilkins was still in the cabin, using it as a shield. Tucker and the remaining Parson brother were regrouping on the porch, and they were all caught in the open. Oakley's return had given them a chance, a slim, bloody, desperate chance. And as Xavier looked from the determined woman on the ridge To the fierce old man hunkered down in the wagon, he knew they were going to take it. The fight for the Kincaid Ranch had begun. "Oakley," Elliot's voice was a roar of relief and terror. "Get down from there." But Oakley held her position on the ridge, a guardian angel with a Winchester. Her presence had thrown Tucker's plan into chaos. They had expected to pick off a tired old man and a boy. They hadn't expected a fight on two fronts. "You and Oliver, get to the rocks," Xavier yelled at Elliot, pointing to a nearby cluster of boulders that offered some cover. "Lay down suppressing fire on the cabin." Elliot didn't hesitate. He and Oliver scrambled from the wagon, rifles blazing, forcing Tucker and the last Parson brother to duck back inside. The move gave Xavier the opening he needed. He spurred his horse, not toward the rocks, but in a wide, daring circle toward the back of the cabin. They were focused on the front. They wouldn't expect an attack from the rear. As he rode, he saw Oakley leave her perch and begin a careful descent, moving from cover to cover, her rifle never wavering. She was a hunter, and this was her territory. Xavier reached the back of the cabin. He dismounted, pressing himself against the rough wood. He could hear panicked shouting from within. Wilkins, his voice high and shrill, was screaming at Tucker. "You said this would be clean. You said they'd just sign it." "Shut up, you fool," Tucker snarled back. "Grab a gun." Xavier crept to the back window, the one they'd boarded up. He used the butt of his revolver to smash a hole in the wood, then another. He shoved the barrel through. "Wilkins," he yelled, "it's over. Come out with your hands up." A pistol shot answered him, the bullet splintering the window frame next to his face. So Wilkins had found his courage. From the front, Elliot and Oliver's rifles roared, pinning the others down. Xavier saw his chance. He took a deep breath and kicked the back door with all his might. The cheap lock splintered, and the door flew open. He stormed in, his Colt leading the way. The remaining Parson brother was turning from the front window, his eyes wide with shock. Xavier fired once. The man went down. In the center of the room, Horace Wilkins stood trembling, a small fancy derringer in his hand. He looked at Xavier, then at the fallen man, and his face crumpled in terror. He dropped the gun as if it were a hot coal. But where was Tucker? A floorboard creaked above him. The loft. "Tucker!" Xavier yelled. "It's finished!" A shotgun blast answered him, a spray of buckshot tearing through the floorboards where he'd been standing a second before. Xavier dove behind the thick wooden table, splinters raining down on him. Tucker was cornered, and he was getting desperate. Outside, the shooting had stopped. Elliot, Oliver, and Oakley were closing in. "Xavier, are you all right?" Oakley's voice called from the doorway. "Stay back," he yelled. "Tucker's in the loft." Another shotgun blast tore through the room. This time, it wasn't aimed at Xavier. It was aimed at an oil lamp sitting on the mantelpiece. The lamp shattered, spraying oil across the dry wooden wall. A stray spark from the blast caught, and in an instant, a curtain of flame erupted, climbing toward the ceiling. The cabin was on fire. The smoke was thick, acrid. Flames were eating their way up the walls with terrifying speed. History was repeating itself. Tucker was trying to burn his problems away again. "Come and get me, Drifter." Tucker's voice, half mad, echoed from the loft. "Let's see if you can walk through fire twice." Xavier looked at Wilkins, who was huddled in a corner, weeping. Then he looked at the flames cutting off the front door. Oakley was screaming his name. He had no choice. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from a nearby chair, threw it over his head, and charged toward the ladder to the loft. The heat was immense, a living thing that wanted to consume him. He climbed, the roar of the fire in his ears, knowing that a cornered, crazy man with a shotgun was waiting for him in the smoke-filled darkness above. He was climbing into hell. The smoke in the loft was a blinding, choking fog. Xavier threw the blanket aside, his eyes streaming, his lungs screaming for air. He could hear Tucker coughing somewhere in the darkness, a ragged, desperate sound. "Nowhere left to run, Tucker!" Xavier gasped out. The silhouette of a man rose from behind a stack of crates. "Tucker," he leveled the shotgun. "I ain't the one who's running." He fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Xavier threw himself sideways, the buckshot tearing through the space where his chest had been. He landed hard, his revolver flying from his grasp and skittering across the floorboards. He was unarmed. Tucker racked the shotgun, the sound a death sentence. He stepped forward, a grim smile on his smoke-stained face. "This is for taking what was mine." But as he aimed, another figure erupted from the top of the ladder. Oakley. Her face was a mask of soot and fury, a hunting knife clutched in her hand. She had followed him into the inferno. She threw herself at Tucker, not with a scream, but with a silent, focused rage. The shotgun went off, the blast going wide, blowing a hole in the burning roof. They tumbled to the floor, a tangle of limbs in the swirling smoke. The knife clattered away. Xavier scrambled for his revolver. His fingers closed around the handle just as Tucker threw Oakley off him. The old man was strong. He staggered to his feet, raising the shotgun to bring it down on Oakley's head like a club. Xavier fired. The shot was deafening. Tucker grunted, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then looked back at Xavier. He opened his mouth to say something, but only a bloody cough came out. He crumpled to the floor, dead. The roof groaned above them, ready to collapse. "We have to go," Xavier yelled, grabbing Oakley and pulling her toward the loft window. Below, Elliot and Oliver had brought the wagon around. "Jump!" Elliot yelled. Xavier pushed Oakley out first. She landed in a pile of hay in the back of the wagon. Then he leaped, landing hard beside her just as the roof of the cabin caved in, sending a shower of fire and embers into the evening sky. They raced the wagon a safe distance away and watched the home Oakley had grown up in burn to the ground. Everything they owned was turning to ash. But they were alive. All of them. They found Horace Wilkins stumbling out of the inferno, his fine clothes singed, his face a mess of tears and soot. He fell to his knees before them, babbling about Cyrus Blackwood, about cattle contracts and water rights, confessing everything in a pathetic, terrified stream of words. It was over. The fighting was done. As they stood there, a small, soot-covered family and a drifter, watching the last of their home burn, Oakley turned to Xavier. Her eyes, clear and fierce, even in the midst of the devastation, searched his. "You never told me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Who is Cyrus Blackwood to you?" Xavier looked at the fire, at the end of one life and the beginning of another. The lies were done. The secrets were turning to smoke. "He's my father," he said. The confession hung in the smoky air, heavier than any gunshot. Cyrus Blackwood, the architect of their ruin, the phantom partner Wilkins had babbled about, was Xavier's father. Oakley stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who had saved her, who had fought for her, with the son of the man who had tried to destroy her. Elliot Kincaid stepped forward, his face grim, his rifle still held at the ready. "Your father sent you here?" "No," Xavier said, his voice raw. "I ran from him. I ran from his name, his money, his dirty deals. I came to Montana to be someone else. I never knew he had interests here. I never knew about any of this until Tucker mentioned his name." He looked at Oakley, his heart aching with the fear that this truth would shatter the fragile bond between them. "I swear to you, Oakley, I didn't know. She held his gaze for a long, agonizing moment. She saw the truth in his eyes, the self-loathing, the desperate need to be believed. She had seen him run into a fire for her, stand against armed men for her, follow her into a burning loft. Actions spoke louder than bloodlines. "I believe you," she said, and the tension broke. Elliot lowered his rifle, giving a slow, weary nod. The next few days were a blur. The local sheriff, an honest man named Miller, came out to the ranch. He took a weeping Horace Wilkins and the injured Parson brother into custody. Wilkins's confession, along with ledgers found in his office in town, exposed the entire conspiracy. Cyrus Blackwood's name was on everything, a spider at the center of a web of land grabs and intimidation that stretched all across the territory. He was too powerful, too far away to be touched by local law, but his scheme to take the King Cade Ranch, and with it, control of the valley's water, had been shattered. They had won, but their victory felt hollow as they stood amidst the ruins. Their home was gone. The barn was a charcoal skeleton. All they had left was the land itself, and each other. One evening, as the sun set, Xavier found Oakley standing by the creek, staring into the water. "My father wants to sell," she said without turning around. "He says there's nothing left for us here, that Blackwood's shadow will always be over this valley." "What do you want to do?" Xavier asked quietly. She turned to face him. "I want to rebuild. This is my home. My mother's dream was in this soil. I won't let your father, or any other man, scare me away from it." Her chin was high, her eyes defiant. "It will be hard work," he said. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she countered. He stepped closer. "You won't have to do it alone," he said, "if you'll have me." It wasn't a proposal, not in the traditional sense. It was something more, a statement of fact, a promise. He was a man who had been running his whole life, from his father, from his name, from his past. But standing here with this woman, on this scarred piece of land, he didn't want to run anymore. "My name is Youngblood," he said, "but my father's name is Blackwood. It's a name that will bring you nothing but trouble." "We've already had trouble, Xavier," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. "We seem to be pretty good at handling it. Besides, I've grown rather fond of the name Youngblood." She stepped into his arms, and he held her close, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. They weren't just survivors. They were partners. They had been forged in fire, tested by blood, and had come out stronger. They rebuilt. With help from honest neighbors like the Parkers, who were horrified to learn how their son had been used, a new barn rose from the ashes, and then a new, larger cabin. It wasn't easy. Blackwood's influence meant loans were denied and supplies were scarce. But they persevered, their shared struggle deepening their bond into a love as strong and resilient as the mountains that watched over them. Xavier Youngblood had come to Montana a drifter, looking for a place to disappear. Instead, he found a place to belong. He found a home. He found a woman who was as wild and unconquerable as the land she loved. He had spent his life running from his father's legacy of greed and destruction, and here, in the ashes of that destruction, he would build a new legacy of his own, a legacy of courage and of love. Their story became a legend in the valley, a story of how a drifter with a dark past and a rancher's daughter with an unbreakable will stood together against a fire, and in doing so, set their whole world alight. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss the incredible tales we have coming next.